So this is part 2 of my discussion on energy vampires, and we are looking at the 7 of Earth zone of boundaries. And this is from my very own deck, the Palmistry Tarot deck. And today I want to talk about how you can tell if you are vulnerable to these types of situations and these types of people. And you can actually read it in your very own hands, and there's quite a few indicators for you to look for. So I am going to just take you through and show you how this appears in your very own hands. So by the way, if you're interested in my deck, it's you can get it over at palmistrytarot.com. And here is another picture of the card, the zone of boundaries. And one way to tell is to actually look at your skin texture. Skin texture that is very soft is going to be more vulnerable. It shows that you're extra sensitive. So if you have that like super soft skin, as if you just put on lotion, that is an indicator that you could be vulnerable to energy vampires. Another type of hand shape that you want to look for is the water hand. If you have long fingers and a rectangular palm, water types are the most sensitive of all the hand shapes. So you want to take a look at your fingers relative to your palm. Are they long or short? And then if you have a long, skinny palm, a rectangular palm, this is what a water hand looks like. The next indicator is what we call the Girdles of Venus. And these are minor lines that show up at the upper portion of the hand. They look like little half circles that go around what's called your Apollo finger and your Saturn finger. So your ring finger and your middle finger. These are minor lines. They don't show up on everybody's hands, but if you have them, they indicate that you are very sensitive. So here's an example of how they show up on an actual person's hand. As you can see here, we've got them just wrapping around these fingers. And then we also have one that's inverted. So sometimes the Girdles of Venus can show up normal, which would be curving around to the fingers, or they can show up inverted, where they are appearing upside down and opening up to the heart line, which is this is your emotional line right here. So looking at the heart line, we want to look for a water heart line. This is a heart line that curves to the Jupiter finger or the index finger. If your heart line is looking like this, it shows that you are going to be more vulnerable to energy vampires, because you're opening your energy. You've got your emotional energy is giving and expressive. Okay, so here's what it looks like on an actual person's hand. We've got this curve, as you can see. It's a gentle curve, okay, and it's not a sharp curve, which would actually end underneath the Saturn finger or the middle finger. But it's a gentle curve that goes up to the index finger, also called Jupiter. The next thing to look for is a radial loop on Jupiter. This is a loop fingerprint that opens up to the thumb as opposed to the little finger. Okay, so there's two types of loops. There's a loop, the regular ulnar loop, which opens up to the little finger, and then there's a radial loop that opens up to the thumb. And this type of loop is actually much less common. It only shows up maybe about 20% of the time on the index finger. So, and that's if you have a loop. You could have another type of fingerprint as well, but we're looking specifically for a radial loop on this finger. And this is what it looks like. So you can see it kind of wraps around and it opens up. So imagine that the thumb is over here. Okay. So this shows an openness to others, and the energy is literally opened up. And the Jupiter finger is how you view yourself. It's your power finger. So you're opening up your power to others when you have this type of fingerprint. It's actually, well, it's a sensitivity is what it is. So of course we want to look at the zone of boundaries. And we want to take a look at the quality of that zone, because after all, that's the card that we are looking at, is the zone of boundaries. So again, looking at the index finger, we want to look at the lower section of this finger, and you want to see if the section is small relative to the rest of the finger. So the other phalanges would look larger or just more dominant. And then also check for horizontal lines, because that's going to indicate stress or blockages. And here it is on an actual person's hand. You can see how this zone is weak. It's kind of coming in a little bit. We call that wasting. So that's a definite weak zone of boundaries. But people who have a small zone of boundaries just tend to be more submissive and more passive. And so therefore, they're going to be more prone to the boundary violations. So join me in part 3 to actually figure out how we can solve this energy vampire problem and what can we do to protect ourselves. So stay tuned for part 3.